Welcome to the Sunday morning evening rant. Yes, it is the evening. I've been, well, I didn't get out of bed this morning because it was snowing and raining and windy. So I decided not to get out of bed and just sit and watch it through the window, which was really quite an unusual thing for me on a Sunday, but I just did that. Anyway, we are in the front room again. Purely because I have spent the last week last couple of weeks should I say, trying to sort of get my head around these two things and not really having enough time to concentrate on it, which is always the way, you know, especially at this time of the year where we've got Christmas parties and whatnot going on, and I seem to have been invited to a number of those, which is causing me not to be in to play music, but to be out socialising. But who am I to complain about such things, apart from my waistline, of course. But the DO5 is here. I have been playing with this, and I am very impressed with the actual unit itself. I'm also impressed with the sounds. Even better when you actually layer them on with some sounds from something else. So if I put my T1 back in, you can hear the T1 gives it a bit of depth to the sort of synth lead that's coming off the DO5. So I've been playing around with that. I've actually, funny enough, for the first time for a long time, I've actually written some new music this week. Which maybe I will get to play to you when it's a bit more finished. But I was quite impressed that this sort of inspired me to sit down and actually write some new stuff. I have been struggling recently to write new stuff, so we shall see where that goes. By the way, it's not going to be a top 40 hit because I don't write top 40 hits. But anyway. But it has been an inspiration to me, especially the synths and the leads and the layers. And funny enough, that was one of the reasons why I bought the T1, because I wanted to be able to sit and write. And the T1 I find is a very good platform for writing, for a couple of reasons why I like the T1. I love my Kronos. Don't get me wrong, my Kronos is fantastic. However, there's not an awful lot of surface space on the Kronos for actually putting things on it. So, you know, if you look at my keyboard here, there is a mixer over here, then I've got the drum machine here, and I've got the DO5 there. Which is great for what I'm playing around with at the moment. And normally, actually, if I'm honest, the computer is sitting there with Ableton or something else on it. When I'm actually sitting down and writing, but I had a bit of a dry spell, so actually this week putting something down really was sort of quite satisfying. Anyway, I'm going to start off. I'll come back to these because they're going to sit there and merrily flash away in the background. A couple of weeks ago, it must be, 2 weeks ago. I went to see G2, well, that's G squared Genesis, near where I live. And apart from the fact I felt the youngest person in the room, it was really quite scary actually. I was sort of sitting there and there was all these sort of old people that are older than me, with long grey hair and ponytails. Went to see this band, but they are worth seeing. They really are worth seeing. They concentrate on the era of Genesis from when Gabriel left, which is sort of around about 76, up to, they do some of the early 80s stuff, but they tend to sort of drop off around about, I think it's Wind and Wuthering, which was the album after Trick of the Tail. But they play a load of stuff across there. And they're not afraid to tackle the longs either. I mean, they did Suppers Ready without too many mistakes, all 23 minutes worth of it. So they are not afraid to tackle those sort of records. They did Assault and Battery and numerous others, and if you're a Genesis fan, like I confess to be, then you will thoroughly enjoy going to see G Squared live. I think they've now finished for the year, so they won't be back out on the road until the new year. So, you know, but if they come to a place near you in the UK, I don't know whether they do overseas stuff, but they definitely tour the UK every year. They're a bit like the Illegal Eagles, really. They just keep going round and round. If you want to go, if you love the music, you go and see them. So, I highly recommend, if you like the music of that era of Genesis, which I do. I'm a firm fan of Genesis. I got into Genesis when the Then There Were Three album was released. It's an interesting story actually, because I went out to, I had a German pen pal when I was in the early 80s, and I went out to Germany on one of the exchange trips, and his brother was heavily into he was into a number of bands, but he was quite heavily into Genesis and Toto. And I've found that over the years, I have always loved Genesis and Toto, and it comes back to this guy's brother, Jochen, and his love of that. He used to go out in his car, when he had a black BMW, and he used to go out in his car, because he was quite a lot older than my pen pal, and you'd have sort of Toto and sort of Genesis and a couple of other rock bands that he loved. And before I left Germany on my first trip, he gave me 2 tapes, one of which was the Then There Were Three album, and one of which was the Toto album, wasn't it, with Africa and Rosanna and on it. So they sort of stayed with me for years and years and years, until I had enough money to go and buy my own CD copy. In fact, I think I had the CD and the vinyl of both those albums, because they were just fantastic. But it got me into, that's where my sort of love of that sort of music comes from, is sort of that area where he gave me tapes of his favourite music, and it stuck with me. But, you know, and that's sort of what drove me to start playing keyboards ultimately, I suppose. Weird that, isn't it? Anyway, enough said on G Squared. If you like that music, go and see them, because you really will enjoy seeing them live. Okay, next thing on the list is on the last Sunday morning rant, I sat down and I sort of held up all these pictures of MKS units, and I completely missed one of the biggies from that range, which was the 70. I sort of merrily went from the 50 to the 80 and forgot to say anything about the 70. So the MKS-70 was the Super JX, which was a sort of rack mount of the JX-10 really. And again, it's another one that is of those MKS units that is really sought after. In fact, actually this week I was just sort of Googling MKS units just to see if there are any sort of around on the market and available on the market. And there's a number of them on the market, but they're up at the €1,500 mark. Or, you know, I think the cheapest one I saw was one in really quite bad condition, and that was still sort of on eBay for €600. So they're heavily in demand as units. So, you know, I still would love a 20, and I'm on the lookout for a 20. That will be a Christmas present if I find one. Even if it's the middle of next year, it'll still be a Christmas present. But I haven't seen one yet. So I apologise, I missed the 70, and somebody did come drop me a comment on the channel and say, "Wait, you've missed the 70." So keeping myself honest and acknowledging I didn't do a fantastic job of going through the MKS range last week, I now rectify that by talking about the 70. Of course, the other thing about the MKS range, just while I'm on there, is there was a number of, all the programmers for the relevant synth that they were rack mounts for would work with the MKS unit. So for example, the Super JX was the PG800, and then the MKS-7 I think was the PG200, which was for the relevant synthesizer. So, you know, they did keep sort of continuity, so you can actually program as well. And then, of course, obviously on the 80, they actually had a rack mount programmer that could be mounted above the synthesizer, so that you can actually program as you were working with it. But enough said on that. So now we're going to move on to the TR-08, which is this beastie behind me. Now, I'm not sure, hopefully this is going to come out from the speakers onto the microphone, because I haven't got these fired into that. I've just changed the mixer that's attached to the camera, and I've done that for a very good reason, in that the old mixer which I was using was one of these here. I don't know whether anyone's ever come across one of these. This is the IRIG Pro. Okay, and it was good, apart from the fact that if you didn't supply this with a stereo mic signal, it wouldn't record the microphone onto both channels. So what you ended up having to do was you ended up having to do a couple of things. Number one, you ended up having to sort of like put it through a splitter. The problem with that was that the sound got a little bit distorted, so it wasn't great. Or what I ended up doing was running it through a mixer. So I ended up with two wires coming out the auxiliary sends off the mixer to go into this thing to record against the camera. So then there was a wire that then came out this and went into the camera. So I really couldn't get on with this. It's okay for what it is, but my experience is it is very, very hungry on batteries. So I would be going through two of these, and it took two of these, probably every other recording session. I found it very, very hungry, battery hungry for what it was. And I also struggled with the, because the power, if you took power from mains power, which was just a little power supply I've got for it, you then ended up having to cart that round with you, which wasn't particularly a great idea. So I've changed from that, and somebody recommended to me the Roland GoMixer, which is the one I've now got attached to this, and I'm finding that far easier to use actually with the camera setup that I've currently got, to the point where it's actually easier to actually plug the instruments directly into the GoMixer, so you can hear them. Telephone stops playing. So I've got friends coming round for dinner, and that was them just telling me that they had just left where they were leaving. I was actually wondering whether they were actually going to turn up this evening, given that it has been such foul weather in the UK. Definitely where they live. Well, they only live about 15 miles north of me, but 15 miles north of me is covered in snow, whereas where I live at the moment is not covered in snow at the moment. So I was half expecting them to tell me they weren't coming, but that was them ringing to tell me they were. So anyway, going back, so I've got this GoMixer which I'm still experimenting with, but I think I've now managed to get sort of it set up correctly. But I'm still playing around with the instrument settings on it, which sounds a bit daft, but you really need to sort of listen and play until you get the instrument settings and the levels right. So I haven't quite got that. So I haven't got the instruments plugged into that. They're still plugged into my mixer and the speakers in my lounge. So anyway, going back to the TR-08, which is what started this off. So TR-08, if you haven't seen the TR-08, you know, it is a faithful copy of the TR-808. And what I first have to say is, even though I have a TR-8, the ARIA version, it doesn't work the same way this thing does. And I've never played with the TR-808. I've seen a couple of them, but I've never really played with one. So when I got hold of this, it's taken me a while to get my head round how things work on this unit, because they don't work the same on the ARIA unit. So anyway, you know, the big button does what it says it's going to do. and then to rewind. So there's a counter here, so it can see how many bars in you are, and to move forward and back on that, you just do that. That took a long while to work that out. So once you've written something, you can write many patterns into this, and then, as I say, once you've written the pattern in, you can then work on it on that way. So then you get off of that. So there are a number of patterns on here. And to change patterns, effectively what you do is you put this into play, and then you've got all these patterns there. So of course I've got that off camera, so I'm not actually doing more. So make sure that's in play, which is where it is there. I'm not sure whether that's coming out on camera properly. And then you've got all the patterns in that particular bank, if you like. So there you go, there's, change it to a different one. Alright, it's going to change now. Try again. So that's taken a while to get used to, that piece. Then you go on to something called compose, which is the next one round, like so. And what that allows you to do is, if I wind that back to 1, like so. So we've got that one loaded in. And then you can effectively tell this thing where you want to be. That doesn't sound like I'm doing that justice, actually. So, this is where live demos go really wrong. Oh dear. It's meant to change. Let's try that one. There you go. A change. I'm doing really well here, aren't I? I've just been sitting playing with this and I completely messed that up. Then you've got something called this manual play. And what manual play does is it allows you to right. Effectively allows you to manually enter on here made a spectacular cock up at that, really, if I'm honest. I will do a video that's much clearer. Sit down to do a live demo of this thing and it just goes completely to pot. Anyway, so on here you do have the bass drum, the classic snare drum, low conga, low tom, mid conga, mid tom, high conga, and they're all done by buttons. So if you press the button up, if you see that button there, press it up one way, press it down the other way, you get one combination or the other combination, and whichever you got selected when you do that, all these buttons at the top of it will affect that particular instrument. Now, what I'm not sure about at the moment is, because I haven't really played with this enough, is whether I think if you program the low conga and then go to program the low tom, then it remembers the low conga. Okay, so the settings you have for that. But I haven't really played with it enough to be able to sort of make that statement with confidence. And then what you have down the bottom is you have these classic 16 steps. So effectively what it's saying is there are, if you're doing a sort of standard 4/4 time, then there are the 4 beats per bar. You have 4 bars of beats there before it recycles. You can have an A pattern, a B pattern, and you can cycle between the two if you wanted to, or you can do what you heard earlier on, which is you can program a sequence so that it will play effectively the A pattern, the B pattern, a number of times in rotation before it recycles. So the one it started with was the hand clap, and you got 4 of the hand claps before you then got 8 of the drum track, and then another 4 of the hand claps, and then another 8 of the drum track. Fairly simple stuff, but it's really the sound that this thing makes that makes this sort of truly unique, and the reason why I dipped my hand in my pocket and went and bought it. And as I say, there are a number of things you need to do to this, as you do to the D-05 before you actually start using it, of course. Is one of the things you will find is you will find the firmware on this is not the latest. Even though this is brand new, this is now a month old, that's a month old, and both of these have had the firmwares updated on them. Okay, so obviously there was an issue out of the box with both these units, and the firmware's been immediately updated. There is a video on the channel which shows you how to update the firmware of these two things. Because I think you really should have the firmware updated to the latest version. Also, it means that when Roland is describing things on their website, because I found something they described on this, and when I went to look for the feature with the original firmware that it was shipped with, found I couldn't find the feature, did the firmware update, and lo and behold the feature arrived, which was really interesting. So the feature is in the shipping manual, the instruction documents, but wasn't actually on the machine when it shipped. So that means that these have been, or the instructions have been printed against the newer version of the firmware, or not the older version of the firmware. Interesting, that one, but you know, there was obviously a reason why it happened. I mean, these things are manufactured way in advance of probably these things being printed. So in order to sort of get enough units into the market to do the launch, so you should go and do that. There's also a video on the channel that shares how to get this to talk to your computer, because you do need to load the drivers onto your computer unless it's fully class compliant like a Windows 10 machine. But even having said that, I have found with the Windows 10 machines they're not always picking up the drivers, which I'm finding very, very interesting. I found that with when my new Windows 10 machine arrived for the ARIA stuff that's in the studio, I had to go and look for the drivers for ARIA to put them on the Windows 10 machine, because the Windows 10 machine wasn't doing what it should have done, which is found those drivers on the internet somewhere. I'm not quite sure how it does it, but it goes out, it looks for them and brings back the right drivers. But I found that with the ARIA stuff, and definitely with this, I've had to go and actually load the drivers on because it wasn't finding them. I don't know whether anybody else has had that experience, but there we are. So that's the reason why we are in here today, because I am playing with these at the moment. The other thing is I've had a stack of discs arrive in the last week. One is a dual bank, which is just a new set of new age sounds for the T1. Ignore that one for a moment. The other one here is this is the T series work discs. Now I had a whole bunch of work discs, which is sort of a TSM. But what these are is a number of work discs for different parts of the structure that was put out with the T series. So, for argument's sake, this is the V330 Roland piece, AC Piano XL, ARP Omni. Okay, so they arrived this week. Haven't put them into machine yet, but again, like with all my other keyboards, I'm sort of getting quite a good library now set up. So it's becoming quite interesting looking at the sounds of these. And the last thing I'm going to touch on, and this is really sort of for feedback, so if people sort of see this video and give me feedback, what do you do with your software? How do you back it up? And the reason I'm asking that question is because one of the people who subscribe to the channel, and I chat with quite a lot, is in California. And if you are aware, California is currently suffering from raging wildfires. And he is a little way away from those, so he's all right at the moment. But he sent me a link this week to a story about a composer who lived in the affected area, and it showed basically this guy's house was in rubble, burned down. It was rubble, and the sort of, if you like, the piece around it was, about this musician losing his livelihood. Now, for me personally, I keep most of my software on a mirrored drive, which has the other side of the mirror in the cloud. Okay, so that's how my system works. It just means that if for whatever reason I lose my Apple device, then the sounds, the recordings, the videos I do, this sort of stuff, are all backed up somewhere. That's the reason why I do it. For me, though, probably the hardest thing would be to replace the legacy technology that I have in the studio. I'm not quite sure how I do that in the event of a major catastrophe. But, this stuff is getting on. I probably have to live with that. I mean, I could replace the newer stuff because I can buy that on eBay, or I can still go and buy it brand new from the manufacturer still. But the older stuff is not going to happen that way. So the question really was, how do you ensure that your work is not lost? Let me know. Be interesting to see what other people's approaches are. Anyway, until next week. I will try to do this next week, although it will be coming very close to my birthday, and I can't guarantee that I will be sober on Sunday morning. Sayonara. Bye-bye. If you like the contents of this video, please give it a thumbs up. Apparently, it helps the channel and allows other people to find this video a lot quicker. I'm sure by now, if you didn't like the contents of this video, you've already given me a thumbs down. If you want to be notified about future videos that are added to the channel, hit the subscribe button that should be appearing about here.